Ready? Roll call, let the record reflect. Alder Burnett, Alder Galvin, Alder Johnson, Alder Hutchinson are all present. Item C, approval of agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Burnett, a second by Galvin. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item D, approval of minutes from December 13th, 2022.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Galvin, a second by Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item E, regular business number 1. For consideration with possible action to rescind real estate taxes for parcel 22-SC480-1, Richard and Linda Farley at 4177 Algoma Road for a total of $2,733.14. Any questions? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Galvin, a second by Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 2, for consideration with possible action to rescind real estate taxes for parcel number 18-269 Christopher Woodkey at 1029 Neville Avenue for a total of $347.48. Same circumstance. Any questions? Entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Galvin, a second by Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 3, for consideration with possible action to rescind personal property taxes for account number 27624 UP Properties 2/Facilities previously at 2400 East Mason for a total of $1,135.85. Fazoli's is out of business. Any questions? Alder Burnett?
Just maybe more of a point of order, but we're on Zoom here, and is there any member of the public here for a specific agenda item? I don't know.
Alex is one of our appraisers in our assessor's
Oh,
office.
okay, we're
So in
good.
case you had questions on these 3 items.
Yeah.
Okay, good catch, Alder Burnett, though.
There's no one else watching this?
Wow, boring today. All right, any discussion on that one? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Alder Burnett, motion by Galvin, second by Alder Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item number 4, request by Alder Brian Johnson of the Finance Committee, which states for consideration possible action to direct staff to draft an ordinance that defines the frequency by which the city must conduct revaluations with a more stringent requirement than currently mandated by state law. So I submitted this communication kind of in response to a number of the things that were going on, obviously, through the revaluation process. As all of you recall, it's been 17 years since the revaluation was last done. When we, as a finance committee, I believe, and Director Ellenbecker could speak to this, but when we authorized the city to finally proceed with the revaluation to ensure that we would not be out of compliance with state law, it had been 17 years. Accompanying with that came a recommended policy, which was then adopted by the committee to do this every 5 years. Now, that was policy, not an ordinance. Since that time, myself, and I'm sure many of you as well, have received calls about revaluations for properties that had significantly appreciated during that 17-year period, and as a result, they saw a disproportionate rise in property taxes. And so I wanted to revisit this because in that time period, I've since talked to some folks from other municipalities, and Alder Galvin, you even alluded to this, I think, one time after a meeting, that some cities do this more frequently. And I've heard of cities that do it every year. I think Milwaukee, Madison, if I'm not mistaken, I think do it every year. I think De Pere might do it every year, every other year, but it's definitely more frequently even than the 5-year policy that we adopted. And of course, even with a policy, we all know this, policies aren't law, and so it would be very easy for a council to say, you know what, we're going to bypass a policy. So I put this in here because I wanted to engage around a dialogue of what is the appropriate period of time that we do this, because right now, we're assessed at a high point in residential and a low point in commercial. Markets swing. I would anticipate that'll swing at some point. And then, of course, should this be a law, and what's the frequency? So it's up for discussion, I guess. Alder Galvin.
Just 2 questions, and I'm not sure if the answers are here, which is, that's fine. We can get it at a later date. But how long did it take to do the reevaluation? Does anybody on staff know?
It was about 2 years, wasn't
I
it?
thought it was
I was
about.
going to say, we signed the contract into the end of 2019, I believe, so they started the work in 20.
It was a small part, right? A couple months worth.
Yeah, at the very end, I think. So So I could get that exact information.
All right, and then I guess how much did it cost to do the, because we hired outside help for that, didn't we?
We hired outside counsel and it cost it was $338,000, plus then there was also postage for the letters that we did not take into consideration. So overall, it was about $345,000, almost $350,000. There were some additional requirements from our staff to also help make this reval complete. So, but outside extra additional dollars, we spent about $340,000.
Would it be less expensive if we did it on a regular basis instead of waiting 17 years? Or is that something we need to check with the?
I got the impression that it would be less, but again, I would say yes, I believe that's what the assessor had said, because there would be less things that would have to be done on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you.
Real quick, I don't mean to try to cut you off, but I think it needs clarity too that we actually had a bond for this, right? This was not tax levy supported, so we're bonding for the reassess. We bonded and paying off the bond for the reassessment we just completed.
Correct, we took a state trust fund loan out for $340,000.
How long was that loan for?
We took out 10-year.
10 years, see, so that's, so we're be paying, I love the idea of moving forward, like coming up with a better policy. Obviously, it's gonna cost money, and the real irony is we're gonna be paying off for the one we just did while we're paying for the one we're doing in the future. Because likely, we're gonna probably do it, if we have our wits about us, we do it sooner than the 10 years. Got us in this mess in the first place.
Well, and that's part of what I think staff will be bringing back to us is, you know, what they think it would cost if we did it every 2 years, every 5 years, and then I would prefer we do a budgeted
It
item.
would have to be, yeah. Much like we've reacted to the term of some of our loans and notes, right? We during the budget process, we shrunk some of those terms down, so that we're not paying for 10 years on 3-year cars. I think the same principle here, right? So, I mean, for me, I think an ideal scenario on this item would be to refer this to staff. I think a couple things, you know, Alder Galvin, you alluded to it, which is if we did this more frequently, what would the price be? And then I'd like to also, if you took, and perhaps staff could give us some guidance on this, we've done this often where we say the top 10 municipalities, right? And then we reach out to them and then get some information about how frequently they do it. And then maybe even if they have this baked in ordinance versus policy, or if it's just something that they smartly do, right? They don't wait. So,
Yeah.
if I could just grab Alder Hutchinson.
Does the industrial or business and homeowning reassessment have to be done all together? Or can it be done one or the other, or can it be done partial? Is it all or nothing, I guess?
It's all or nothing.
It's all or
State
nothing?
statute.
Okay.
Alder Burnett?
Right,
Yeah.
because you would have to be careful that you wouldn't pick the one where the market is up or the market is down. You would want to choose, you know, which one you're going to do based on the market.
Okay. Thanks.
Alder Burnett?
Yeah, Director Ellenbecker, I guess one of my fears when we were going through this process is it seemed to me, and again, homeowners, property owners had every right to challenge their assessment, but it seemed to me, common sense was that some properties were higher, assessed higher than what the property owner felt their property was worth. And I guess my fear is next year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, if we see their property values drop, then some people are going to be assessed at a higher value than what perhaps they could sell their home for. So we're going to have a whole other set of problems potentially in a couple of years. Obviously, I hope our home values keep their value, but with markets the way that they are, there's no guarantee. So let's just say hypothetically, a year or two from now, property values do drop significantly. We're not adjusting the assessment downward in any way. That's what this discussion is about. We would have to reassess the city citywide.
Correct.
So that would be my fear. So right now, you know, we dropped the tax rate 20%, give or take. In my opinion, we should have dropped it more. I guess my fear is that if property values go down, that tax rate's going to go up. So there's just so many layers, but we just need a fair assessment, and to do it every 15 to 17 years, whatever it was, that's just bad. It was bad. It was to previous people. Maybe I was part of that at some point, but we just need to come up with a solution. So I support the refer to staff.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, to me, it's about making sure that people are paying their fair share, right? So that nobody is paying more than they ought to. And conversely, that we're not paying less than we ought to. And so one of the reasons that sort of I'm being kind of maybe requesting this is I think if we wait 5 years to do this, as I mentioned, the residential market is hot right now, so prices are assessing higher. Commercial market right now is not so hot, and that's why that didn't grow at the same level. Director Ellenbecker, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think average commercial property citywide grew about 20%, but I believe residential was closer to 40,
37.
right? So that means residential properties assumed a disproportionate increase in that, and so they're paying more taxes in aggregate than commercial did in the past. Now, I suspect, since commercial is partially based on, it's based on a number of factors, including leases and all that, right? And you saw, commercial took a hit during the pandemic, right? It's not occupied as much, leases have changed and modified. So my hunch is, you caught commercial kind of in a valley right now, and that'll rebound eventually, as most markets do. And I'd like to just make sure that when that happens, whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years, that we've appropriately made that shift to make sure that commercial is then paying their fair share, while residential property owners get a little bit of relief that would be expected when their home prices have not kept pace with commercial. So that's kind of where my mind's at on it. Elder Story, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Do I need to come up?
Microphone might catch you better, I don't know.
Maybe. So you mentioned the 5 years, every 5 years, and like you just said, that, things may fluctuate over that period of time. So would you kind of look at whatever would work the best for the city at that particular time? It might be 4 years, it might be 6 years, but, maybe to keep that in mind. I'd also like you, with this referral back to staff, to maybe look at what these other 10 communities, how much are they, how are they paying for this? Are they bonding? Is it on the levy? Is it a budget item? Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If they could do that as well, I think that would be a good thing. So,
Good.
that's what I got.
Thank you, Alder Story. Any more discussion on the item? Okay, if not, I'll take a stab at a motion. I would move to refer this to staff and have staff inquire with top 10. Do you have like a magic list, Director Ellenbecker, that you use?
Do you want comparable sizes or the surrounding?
So I'll direct staff for the top 10 cities in the state of Wisconsin and a couple of our nearby municipalities to determine how frequently they do their reevaluations, if it is an ordinance, policy, or they just do it. And also to inquire what the presumed cost might be for the city to do it on a more frequent basis, recognizing that we're not trying to do 17 years of catch-up work, right?
Keep going.
Anything else in there?
Anything else you want to add to that?
I just want to make sure we get all the,
Yeah, I'll second that. I'll second that.
is there anything else you want to keep going on?
Oh, hey, no, that's
All right.
good.
I mean, I think that's what'll help us make an informed decision.
No, I agree,
Yeah.
definitely.
So if there's any other information that you feel like we need to gather, just let staff know, but otherwise we'll do that and then we'll bring it back when staff has that ready and we'll discuss. All right, so that was a motion by Johnson, a second by Galvin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 5, request by Alder Brian Johnson to the Finance Committee, which states for consideration of possible action on the adoption of a resolution urging local government funding reform, including but not limited to shared revenue, and requesting the state consider surplus distributions to local municipalities for investments in public safety and infrastructure needs. So this, same deal here. This was rooted in a couple of things. One is recognizing that the state does have a record surplus, and there are active conversations in the legislature right now about what to do with that. I think municipalities all across the state are struggling to find ways to pay for public safety as well as infrastructure. that is, so I kind of combined two things here. There was a draft resolution here. I'm not necessarily looking for this committee to adopt the resolution. That resolution came from the League of Municipalities. It is something that they are working with other folks across the state. I just happened to reach out to them and they told me, hey, we're talking to other communities about this. It's been talked about here, the reduction in shared revenue that our city receives, which obviously creates a situation where when you combine that with levy limits and expenditure restraint, that the only way for you to pay for all of these expenses is with limited property tax increases. We have no other revenue source to go from. And then also you complicate that with personal property taxes. I mean, half of that was cut out several years ago by state legislation. And there is still a desire and intent, I think, to cut out the other half. And so, all of a sudden now we become entirely dependent on property tax revenue. And the only way for us to continue to pay for public safety and roads is through debt. And now all of a sudden we have $200+ million of debt because it is our only path forward on these things. So we need to see some level of reform. It is a conversation that is actively going on with our state legislature right now. And all I'm looking for is for the city of Green Bay to kind of go on record to say, hey, we're here. We'd like to be an active part of that discussion.
I think it's a good idea.
So I think, again, I'm not necessarily looking for us to pass this resolution. My intent was to get it in front of you as a draft, as here's an example of what we can do. I think that there are a couple of things that we can modify on this resolution that are more Green Bay specific. So, in fact, what I would suggest is maybe we just hold this over to the next finance meeting, and then that would give staff, as well as the committee, an opportunity to maybe add any additional verbiage to this resolution that you'd want. Alder Burnett?
Yeah, I'm fine with whatever you recommend. I just want to make a comment that when we talk about surplus distributions to fund investments in public safety and infrastructure, with the ARPA funds and some of the other grants we have received, we've been able to do things, extraordinary things that normally we wouldn't have the opportunity to do. Some of our challenges, though, from a budget standpoint, isn't so much all those additional things, but just the normal things like funding police cars, paying for staff, paying for equipment, paying for body cameras. So when we do this resolution, I don't want to just look at like funds for special investments into the future, but maybe just help with some of the day-to-day things that we require to operate a police department, which, as far as I'm concerned, that's my recollection, it's our biggest department within our city government.
Yeah, and that's a great observation, and maybe I'll point this out. I would even maybe envision a scenario where we actually separate these into two resolutions. One that addresses the surplus, one that addresses shared revenue, because they are different items. The shared revenue would do exactly what you're talking about, right? That's money that comes in from the state. We get that right now. Unfortunately, it's been reduced more, however many years ago. Was that 15 years ago? Probably more than that. Not only was it reduced, but then it hasn't risen since then, right? And that's where we become overly reliant then on property tax revenue. So we have that challenge. And then the surplus is the one-time thing that they're going to address now, likely through the budget process. But to be perfectly transparent, why I put public safety and infrastructure on there, the infrastructure is obvious. The public safety, we're in the midst right now of trying to figure out how to fund a new fire station and how to fund a police station. That is my biased approach on that. If the state's got $6.5 billion of surplus, I'd like to see if we can open up some paths for us to figure out how to fund those big items locally, while the shared revenue would do more of the budgetary day-to-day things.
I agree.
So maybe what I'll do, instead of a hold, I'll make a motion to refer this to staff to come back to the next finance committee to modify the League of Municipality resolution to either add or remove anything that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for Green Bay. And then also to draft a resolution regarding the state surplus that would allow a distribution to local municipalities for public safety and infrastructure needs.
I'll second that.
Okay. No, that's it. And to clarify, the reason I added public safety and infrastructure needs, I've actually had conversations with several of our state lawmakers. I don't know that there's a strong appetite to do just like a blanket distribution, but I think there's maybe a stronger appetite for specific items, and those items have certainly fallen, I think, within that bucket.
Yeah,
Other than that-
I thank you for bringing this forward. I support it. I think that obviously cutting costs, cutting taxes, all those things, these are all tough decisions. And normally, how do you fund a local government but through those sorts of revenues? And to your point exactly, we have seen our debt grow substantially, not so much for these frivolous things that you could argue are not needed, but for just some of the day-to-day things that we find it hard to prioritize in our budget. And we just saw a parking ramp, Director Grenier was mentioning, that's on our radar as well. That's important to our local economy, our tourism here in the downtown area, our office buildings, all of that. I think what happens from time to time, and we see it more now, is that municipalities all across the state and country are in competition for the same manufacturing base, the same commercial businesses, the same mega corporations that can infuse a lot of tax revenue into the community. And a lot of times those corporations and those businesses and real connected people often go to the same municipalities looking for tax breaks in order to bring their business. So something needs to break as a culture, as a state, as a community, because we can't have municipalities fighting against each other without the state stepping up and coming up with a solution. And I wish that we didn't have such divided government in the state, because sometimes, as much as I'd love to have solutions found at the state level or the federal level, with the fighting that happens between parties, I'm not sure that can happen. But I'm hopeful that this, at least if we do this properly, is yet another municipality, especially one of our size and reputation, to add our voice to this, hopefully can get the wheels in motion. So thank you for doing this. I'm in full support.
Yeah, and I think the shared revenue, why that's such an important item, I think, to us locally. When you look at, again, property taxes is how we generate income right now. That's what we become reliant on. When you look at county government, they have property taxes and they have a sales tax, right? I would love for the city to be debt-free in a number of years, just like the county. The reality is we don't have that tool. That tool that allows them to reduce their property tax mill rate and then shift that burden over to visitors, right? We don't have the tool that allows us to do that. And then, of course, at the state level, they have the income tax, they have the sales tax, and that's ultimately how that shared revenue gets funded. So what we're saying here is that, hey, to increase that shared revenue, to restore it, we're not even asking to increase it, restore it to what it used to be, restore it to a level that's appropriate for us to fund these things, because you have smaller municipalities who can't even fully fund their public safety needs, right? We're not alone in this discussion. So, and I think if we can, that shared revenue, I think, is just a really critical piece for us that allows that tax burden to be even shifted off of local taxpayers. And I bring that up because this, to me, is not about the city of Green Bay wanting to have this money grab, right? At the end of the day, it's all taxpayer money. But what this does is allows us to be smarter with how we marshal those resources so that we can minimize the impact on taxpayers by not wasting money on things like finance charges and interest.
Exactly. I mean, when you mentioned the system's broken and it's not working right. I understand what the state legislature was trying to do when they put in the blocks that they put in place to prevent us from raising our taxes. But when you have to take out a loan for a squad car, when the public has been crying for more training for police, yet the state has not increased in over 30 or 40 years the amount of ongoing education required for police, much less raising the amount of money that they fund for it. And those are just a few examples. When you have to take out a loan for bulletproof vests and helmets, these things should be part of an everyday budget. And they used to be in Green Bay. I mean, I worked at the PD when it was part of the budget. And somehow that changed and now we're left holding the bag. And then they tie your hands so you can't raise the taxes. They don't give you the means or the ability for a sales tax or anything else to try and remedy that. And that's, like you said, 200 million in debt. And it's only going to go higher and higher if we keep going the same way we're going. And yet, the state is somehow able to collect $6 billion extra dollars. There's something wrong with that picture. That's our money, and we should be able to use that money to better this community without putting us into the kind of debt that we're in right now. So I agree.
Okay. Any other discussion? Let me see, I did make that motion. Who was the second? Galvin. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 6, request by Alder Brian Johnson of the Finance Committee, which states, for consideration and possible action to direct staff to draft a resolution appealing the state to contemplate a modification in the TID statutes to permit the use of TIF to aid in the funding of public safety buildings. Joanna, I'm looking at you because I assume you're here for a reason. Is this the reason? No, okay.
No,
It's just
general.
like
Yeah.
legal support, okay.
Sure.
So my understanding is that TID laws currently do not allow you to use TIF to build public safety buildings. It's not a permissible use. As you guys know, the Ad hoc Facilities Committee is working on a discussion around police headquarters. We are also working on a discussion around a fire station, in addition to City Hall. We're evaluating all of those things. Right now, I'm not suggesting that TIF ought to be the mechanism which we use to do those things, but I think we ought to be in a position right now where we're contemplating all available options, because those are some pretty big investments right now. To me, the state surplus would be the easy way. If they just got a check and say, go build some new places. But right now, if we want to be as fiscally responsible as possible, we have to have as many options on the table as possible. And if you were to think about some of the sites that I know without a doubt will show up as options for the fire station in particular, they will be sites that we could create a TID that would generate new assessable value over the period of that TID, whose increment could be captured. So that way you're not using levy-supported borrowing, you're using TIF-supported borrowing, which may sound like it doesn't make a difference. It's still, at the end of the day, taxpayer dollars, but how it affects the way we handle our annual budget does matter. So essentially what I'm looking for here is just a resolution. I think we can refer this to staff. And staff, I'm happy to work with staff on the language around this. This is a long shot, I'll admit that, right? But if other municipalities right now are struggling to pay for public safety buildings, it would be nice to at least initiate a dialogue on this for our state elected officials to say, hey, why aren't we giving municipalities the tools they need to build public safety buildings? Alderman Agnew.
Yeah, Alderman Johnson, you got your foot in the development world. You know how people think in that realm. Like, what would their hesitation or what would their resistance to this be?
Admittedly, I don't know, right? So we have used TIF to fund a number of local projects, and I think it's one of the biggest misperceptions about TIF, right? I just think the average person probably doesn't understand it. Admittedly, it's even taken me a few years as a member of council to truly appreciate the power that can be leveraged when it's used appropriately. So we use this oftentimes to put in infrastructure like roads. We use it to put in things like stormwater. I think of the lift station to cure a lot of the problems we have with flooding on the near west side. The shipyard is all we borrowed against that TID so that we could build the shipyard, and we're banking obviously on the new increment coming in there to be captured and to fund those things. So there's already a precedence for it to be used for other types of projects. We're just asking them to maybe open the door a little bit more to include public safety as one of those options that has a public purpose.
So, yeah, thank you for that. I'm just trying to understand if we put all this effort, if there's just a real obvious reason why this isn't allowed. And the only thing I can think of, my understanding of TIF, or at least recently, maybe has shifted a little bit, but 15, 20 years ago when I started following local government, it was to allow the redevelopment of blighted areas, areas that there's no economic growth, there's a lot of deterrence for people to move in or develop. So then we would create these, TIFs or TIDs to allow the development to form and then, fund all of the public improvements. My concern is that I'm just looking at the shadow side of this. If we use TIF to fund police stations or fire stations, then perhaps we're just shifting those facilities away from other neighborhoods that are currently in existence. For example, Fire Station 1, Fire Station 3. We know both, one or both, need to be replaced. If this all happens, then we would basically shift that fire station to this development, use TIF dollars, and then what about Station 1 or 3? Those are neighborhoods that are on the edge here. They're hurting in different ways. They're wonderful neighborhoods. I grew up in those neighborhoods. But if you remove a fire station from those neighborhoods and just shift it to an area with growth and development, then you're just creating a vacuum in a neighborhood down the line. So
Yeah, I appreciate why you're saying that. I would say, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it doesn't exist, right? But I would say, at least in the city of Green Bay, we're not gonna do that, right? We have the report that was ordered up for the fire station. They're gonna tell you exactly where it can go in order for the fire department to meet its response times. So we're really, it's,
Yeah.
to me, I would think there's probably a consensus that's going to be a non-negotiable item.
Yeah.
You have to be within that footprint. I would envision a scenario where, again, I'm kind of forecasting a little bit and anticipating which sites are going to come back on that report. And there are a few sites that I know will inevitably come back on that report and would be prime for additional redevelopment. And a new fire station in particular could be the catalyst that gets that area going. So it's no different, to your point, than when you go in and you build infrastructure and you hope, or you build the shipyard and you hope that that's going to catalyze redevelopment in that area. This is the same thing.
Yeah, we always hear equity and equitable, development, and, as an alderman, I live in a wonderful neighborhood, it's incredible, great quality of life, but I would want that for every part of the city. And so when you shift to one part that's growing and developing, maybe at the expense, I know we're different in Green Bay and we aren't going to do that, but when you have a resolution that's statewide, there are some municipalities that would do just that thing. So the challenge for a state government is, how do they develop policies and laws so that there isn't that issue in other municipalities other than Green Bay. So I support this. I think it's a good opportunity. I'm just saying that there's probably a reason why this isn't allowed, and there's got to be some senator or legislator down the road that might not want this, so there might be some barriers.
Yeah.
But a resolution, if it's vetted and properly goes through our channels, I think it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, and I think, and I appreciate that, and I think you're spot on, right? At the end of the day, I'm trying to solve Green Bay's problem, and I think this is a tool that would help us in the right circumstance, not every circumstance, but in the right one. So I'd love for it to at least just be considered by our state legislators, and of course, having the Common Council, put its stamp of approval on this and say, yep, we support this modification because we feel it's going to support Green Bay. I think that just helps with that lobbying effort a little bit more.
You could just put in there for municipalities of 100 to 150,000 people.
Yeah, it's not uncommon, right? They do
No.
Class 1 cities only get this benefit
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
We're not Class 1s, we'll have to go a
That would
little
probably
further
be
down, but.
us only.
Yeah.
I think there's only a couple that fit that criteria.
There's
so
been a few of those in the
map out
past that
Green
have
Bay
been-
only.
Yeah, there's been some
That's
policies
it.
where
I
like
think
Milwaukee
that's it.
gets to do it, but we don't.
Maybe us in Kenosha, I think we'd probably be it.
What are we, at Class?
We're class two.
Okay, how many cities are Class 2 and above?
So only one or two that's in class one. Would be Madison.
Milwaukee, I think,
Only
is it?
one.
Milwaukee's the only one.
Milwaukee's the only class
That's
one.
what they call it, the
York
state.
Oklahoma is only class two, besides Madison and us.
No, but that's a good suggestion. It might be something worth
It makes it
contemplating in
easier.
a
Well,
resolution.
there's been stuff with the, I think with the casinos and that kind of stuff, where there's been, and other legislation in the past that have been structured in a way that it was very narrowly focused to benefit certain communities. And, you talk about moving the stations, but number 4 went from Ashland Avenue all the way out to Packerland Drive. 5 went from Deckner and Henry all the way out to by the East Town Mall. And that's all because they're looking at response time. So I'm not too worried about the fire department. I can see a police department, Where do you place it, where does it best, because the squad cars are already out there
Well,
anyway.
and you have to be in an area that's going to see commercial development. Otherwise, you
makes no
can't
sense.
use it,
Right.
right? So, okay, yep.
Would it be prudent, appropriate, if this is gonna go through and we're gonna send this, to have the report that's being developed for the fire department include a section regarding this as to how applicable it'd be for each location?
Maybe, maybe not, just because then it localizes it a little bit too much, and if they're, to Alder Burnett's point, if you've got to pass a state policy, but I think we might be able to use that to reinforce, maybe use it as an example of why that change can be
Right.
useful.
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking, it just kind of builds
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. And this one, by the way, isn't time sensitive, right? Like talking about state surplus is a little bit more time sensitive. This one is not. So I share that because if we refer this to staff, there's no urgency for staff to, get cracking on this one. We got a little bit of time to allow some of those ad hoc facility reports to come in as well. That might be able to reinforce what you're talking about.
Okay.
So,
Johnson.
yes.
If I could, I don't, Chief Davis is here, and you've had, not that I want to put you on the spot, but you've had experience in departments in other states, and I don't know, pretty well-read research, you have a pulse on communities. Is this something that has come up in other states that you're aware of that have been attempted in Oregon or Arizona?
Sort of. I know that the city that I came from before here struggled with this because they had a very similar problem. They had more facilities than us. I haven't ever seen the tax increment financing question before, and I've never worked in a state that managed to have a $6 billion surplus that was even talked about, but one idea that does come up in other places that has worked, that I've seen work, is like a public-private partnership where, and I know we have some rules about tax abatement here that other states don't have, but, basically you get, you pair a police facility, like East Precinct in Portland is a police facility paired with an affordable housing development, built them together. Or there have been schemes explored to, in cities that are experiencing a lot of development, which is none of them now, but, in the last several years, maybe to try to get a developer, give them a tax break to build your police facility into a larger development or something like that. This is the first time I think I've ever seen the tax increment conversation for police facilities, just because TIF funding tends to be used for developing blighted areas.
Right, but I think what you're talking about is actually a mirror example of what I'm proposing, just within the constraints of Wisconsin state law.
Right.
So to your point, tax abatement's not permitted in the state of Wisconsin. TIF is really the only economic development tool that you have in that regard. So substitute tax abatement with TIF, and then again, you put it in a TIF district where you anticipate to have additional development that would surround that facility. Might not be connected, though it could be, but it kind of serves the same purpose.
Yeah, another thing that factors into that is, I think a lot of departments are starting to get away from the mindset that your police headquarters has to be downtown. You look at Fort Worth, Texas, their police department, their chief's office and all their centralized police stuff is not downtown. It's out, way outside of downtown, but, with electronic meetings and stuff, their chief has no problem taking care of whatever they have to do there. We had that conversation in Portland at one point. We were considering moving it to a neighborhood that experienced a lot of challenges, because that would completely change, a neighborhood maybe that's experiencing a lot of crime issues or public safety issues.
Well, thank you.
Good question, though.
That's good,
Yeah.
good insight.
Okay, so this is just a motion to refer this to staff to draft. And then just, again, I'm just volunteering to help with that. So that is the motion.
Second.
Second by Galvin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item F, informational, number 1, 22 contingency account, $184, $297 unobligated. is $57,297. 2023 contingency account is $250,000. Any questions? All right, number 2, the next Finance Committee meeting will be held on Tuesday, January 24th, 2023 at 4:30 PM. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.
Second.
We have a motion by Galvin, a second by Brunette. That is not debatable. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Throw that in there, didn't you?